and Nanaia. Can you open with a Karakia, please? It's rather loud.
Kia ora tātou. For doing that through the chair, I just like to thank you for allowing us to continue with our protocol within Waikato Tainui, and also to wish all those who are going for those positions all the very best. I'm sure that you're going to have fun on your journey campaigning, and ngā karuatua o te waka, wish all of you the very best in your journey. Nō reira, ki raro te koro ai o tātou matanui i te rangi, a tēnei te mea mihi atu ki a koe e pā. Raro te koro ai o te kihitanga, o te tau tāwhiwa mahu, te terata koraki, te atairangi kāhu, tai mai ki tātou kingi tōmuri, tu hei tia po te tau te wherawhera o tuwhi. I just wanted to acknowledge that, aligned with our new monarchy, who's 28 years old, ngā wai hone i te pō, and to also say through the chair that she's made it quite strongly that we as people work together. She said that in her speech on that Friday, and she's very adamant that she follows through with her father's whakatauki, which is otahi tātou katoa I painga ngā mahi o te iwi. In other words, we must collectively come together, work together, and we progress through any type of concept that we hopefully to achieve within the future. Anō reira, piki mai, kake mai, ko mai tu wairua ke au I tū ana ko te kuia nei ki te pō. O nā waira I rarua I papaki tu ana ngā tai ki te reinga ka pō, ka ao, ka o tea. Turi e whakamau ana ke a tīna. Haumi e, hui e.
Kai kia.
Kia ora tātou.
Kia ora, Nanaia. Just before I go any further, you'll see in front of you there are chocolates. That's courtesy of Lyndall in terms of being the last meeting of the triennium. So thanks, Lyndall, for your thoughtfulness there. And so we've got the next item is the 5.1, the health and safety. Oh, sorry, I better take. It's different to the thing. Okay, I'll keep to the program here. The health and safety statement. I'll take that as read. We'll then move to apologies. In terms of, we have before us Chair Pamela, Mayors Paula, Jackie, and we've got Andrew and Angela Full-James. I don't think there are any other apologies. I'm happy to move receipt of those, seconded by Mayor Adrian. I'll put that. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. Just noting that Andy Baker had intended to be here today, but his commitments in Auckland, so he is online. And also Vanessa from DIA is also online, and Sarah Stevenson, who is our MHUD representative now, will also be online. So move to the next item in terms of confirming the agenda. There are no changes to that. I'm happy to move confirmation of the agenda, seconded by Liz. I'll put that. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. Are there any disclosures of interest in terms of matters on today's agenda? Okay, there are not. So we'll move to the next item, and that is the open FPIC minutes, and they commence on page 8. Can I have someone to move and second those minutes of our 5th of June meeting? Thanks, Carolyn. Seconded by Mayor Susan. Are there any matters requiring clarification or correction in those minutes? There are not. I'll put that. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. So we'll move to the public transport, the Future-Proof Public Transport Subcommittee minutes, commencing on page 18. And on page 18, there are some recommendations for this committee to consider. One of the matters that the committee or the Public Transport Committee considered was the appropriateness of the current arrangements in terms of being a subcommittee of FPIC, the roles of the subcommittee. And there was a concern that trying to conflate operations, PT operations, together with the more strategic focus was somewhat problematic. And often the day-to-day and the operational part can often subsume the discussions around that more strategic direction. The upshot of all of that, and the subcommittee had a couple of workshops on it and then had a report at its final meeting last month. So the upshot of all of that is recommendation to this committee, the Future-Proof Implementation Committee, to disestablish that Public Transport Committee and discharge, in local government speak, all the members, and that the intent is that there be a Public Transport Subcommittee of the Regional Transport Committee. So we don't have to worry about that part of it, because that's something for the Regional Transport Committee and the Regional Council to consider. So our mandate just relates to disestablishing the current subcommittee and also returning the delegation held by that subcommittee back to the Regional Council. So Angela, as Deputy Chair, if you wanted to make any comments around this matter.
Yeah, thank you, Bill. Yeah, I think over this term that the PT subcommittee has, it has raised the profile of PT within FPIC, which has been really important given that link between land use and transport moving forward. So you really appreciate what that has done for PT this term within FPIC. I think moving forward as well, that it's really important that FPIC takes on that mantle of the MSP program, that high-level strategic focus on what the MSP is aiming to achieve, and also that focus on corridors as well. Moving with the recommendation brings a lot of efficiencies for our staff, for committee members, and also retains that local voice as well that we really need with PT operations as well. It's really important that within the arrangements for next triennium that what's been established here with the focus on the subcommittee, the sub-region, is carried forward as well, because the high growth areas, it's not just Hamilton, it's Waipa, it's Waikato, as well as Morrinsville. And that really needs to be held in importance moving forward as well. So to go from the mana that FPIC has given the PT to then move it forward to more of a wider region, going down to the sub-region is really important for that continuity. But yep, just whoever's around the FPIC table next time, if we can just keep the MSP program and the funding, which is massive, at the front of our minds next triennium, that would be really important because that enables what we're trying to do in the short and medium term to happen seamlessly as well. So yeah, thank you, Bill, for chairing that subcommittee this term. We really appreciate your leadership and your calm approach. And yeah, really happy with what has been recommended here. So thank you.
Okay, no, thanks, Angela. I'll open it up for questions. Liz.
Look, I just want to fully endorse actually what Angela has just voiced, because it's been a really important committee, and I appreciate before we established this that there were some tensions always between the city and the rural, and I think that will always continue when you've got a large population that that really encompasses the city. Rural or public transport, sometimes it feels that some of the rural areas might get forgotten, and I know Waipa and Matamata particularly have sort of felt that. So keeping public transport top of mind across the FPIC groups just means that we can keep that rural voice going, because we're all growing quickly. And I just want to kind of, again, just endorse what Angela has said. Those that are sitting around the table, keep your voices strong. It's really important.
Thanks, Liz. Any other comments or questions? Mayor Adrian.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity just to make a comment. I think this is a sensible move now, and just to be more efficient. I think, this is a time when we have to really think of our councils and being efficient with our staff time, because that comes at a cost. And we've made some progress. It's all about building relationships. And I think moving forward as a region, because it's not just about us growth cells as well, it is actually the region and how we create that unity is really, really important going forward to me. And yeah, I'll let Carolyn go next by the looks.
Thank you. Carolyn.
Thank you. Look, I don't disagree that this is the best way forward. My question just really is in respect of oversight. Will there be any reporting at all to FPIC?
Okay. Yes, it's intended there will be, because when we get to, and we'll pick it up when we have a discussion around terms of reference further on the meeting, but the intent is, Carolyn, to have the chair or a representative of that new public transport subcommittee to be a non-voting member of FPIC, in the same way that the likes of Andrew is from NZTA, etc.
Okay.
So again, for that connection, and also making sure that information and thinking goes both ways.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Phil, did you? Oh, sorry, Sarah. You're way down the other end.
Yeah, thank you. So just reflecting on the last 3 years, I think being able to have a greater focus, a very targeted focus around the operational side of things is important. So if we think of the Rototuna rocket, I think if we had been on top of things as earlier on, maybe there would have been an opportunity to have reallocated resources and gotten that underway earlier. I'm not sure, but my feeling was that it was probably not a lot of great work around overall strategy, overall future planning for improvements, but less progress right now in terms of improving current services. So I look forward to next term ensuring that we have a really strong operational as well as strategic focus around public transport, and also continuing to really try and align that infrastructure and the services together, which particularly with government pulling its funding has been a challenge. But yeah, so thanks for the work around this and support the changes.
Angela.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, happy to move the motion.
Well, there are actually some more recommendations which are on page 18, so of the agenda, which talk about the disestablishment of the subcommittee, etc., in a bit more detail. So While Brooke is getting that online, I'll come back to you in a minute because you need to see the recommendations before you move them. I was just going to go to Phil. Anything you'd like to add?
Thank you, Chair. Not really very much from me, other than to acknowledge the work that the subcommittee did achieve in the 3 years of this triennium, which was recorded in a report to that committee and is substantial. So there was a lot of work that committee has led. Looking ahead, we hope to achieve far more with the new structure that we're proposing.
Okay, thank you. Now, if you can delete that one there, then that should be. So it's receiving the minutes, noting the decisions under delegated authority noted, the recommendation of a variation be noted, and then setting out the disestablishment of the subcommittee and recommending the delegations held by the Public Transport Subcommittee are returned to the Regional Council. So are you happy with that suite? So Angela has moved those. I have a seconder for that. Mayor Adrian. There's nothing further. I'll put those recommendations. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. And I'd just like, as Angela and others had noted, just note the work of that subcommittee in the last 3 years. But we'll come back, as I noted earlier, in terms of the connection with the terms of reference discussion later on in the agenda. Okay, we'll now move to item 7.1, the Implementation Advisor's Report, and that commences on page 35. Robert.
Right. I am going to walk through a few of the items in this report before we come back to the recommendations, just because there's some explanation I think that would help in understanding the recommendations. The first thing we're going to talk about is our communications products, one of which is the annual report, which is attached for your endorsement, and also a bit of a walkthrough GIS story map that we've been building that simplifies the communication of the strategy. Remember, the strategy is this enormous, thick, horrible document, lovely document, enormous, thick, impenetrable document, but lovely, and turn it into something that actually is accessible to people. So I've got online Natalie Haysom, our communications advisor, and hopefully Craig Briggs from the Regional Council, who's been doing all of the wondrous GIS stuff behind our story map. And I'll throw to them in a minute to do a demonstration of that. But also Natalie's available to take any questions or suggestions for improvements to the annual report. So maybe if we just pause there for a minute, Bill, and if there are any reflections on the annual report, now's a good time to open those up.
Commentary, questions? No? Oh, Sarah.
I was just going to say, thank you very much, firstly, for the work to everyone who's pulled it together. It's fairly succinct, but it's still, 25 pages, including some pictures, with a bit of narrative in there and stuff. I'm just wondering, like we've discussed previously, is there a very concise cover letter or something for if we're sending it to stakeholders that were like, boom, these are the core achievements in bullet points from this term to pull from that or something?
I can see Natalie nodding. Do you want to say anything, Natalie? It seems a good idea.
Yeah, kia ora koutou. Yeah, that was the plan. So once we get if there's general consensus for the content, then we'll pull together that one-page fact sheet that can sit on the website as well as support any stakeholder communication around it.
Thank you.
Do you have anything further, Sarah?
No, I read it and it was
No?
it was good. So
Okay.
well done. It was
Carolyn.
Thank you. And I just had a wee comment to make in respect of the annual report at page, the picture. Are you wanting to take that?
Yes,
comment
yeah.
now? Okay, so just at page 46, at the risk of being somewhat pedantic, it does appear that the top of our Waikato district is being chopped off in the map.
Yes.
It does, doesn't it?
Could we just please have
Yes.
the entire part of our district depicted in that graphic?
I can
Have
see a
that
nod.
sorted.
I can see a nod
Yes,
from
yeah.
Natalie again.
Yeah, sorry, I keep nodding and not saying anything. Yes, yeah, thank you for that. Kat.
Any other comments or questions? Angela?
Yeah, thank you. Possibly along the same lines, all the transport seems to be quite focused on roads. So maybe a little bit of diversity there.
Great.
Thank you.
Okay. Nothing further. Natalie, any comments you'd like to make in terms of the annual report before we move on to the story map?
Nope, nothing from me.
Okay. Robert?
Okay, I'll say a few words about the story map, and hopefully Natalie and Craig are all set to do a bit of a demonstration. But the idea, I don't know how familiar the committee is with the idea of story maps, but it's a tool that Waipa District used to good effect with Ahuaki. It's a way of putting a planning document into a digital presentation on a website that allows you to interact with it and to move around on a map and see different things happening in different parts of the region as the strategy is implemented. So our intent with this piece of work is that we can publish that on the web, use that particularly with our central government stakeholders as a tool for them supporting ministers, giving the ministers bedtime reading, that sort of stuff, but also with our broader stakeholders about what is future-proof, what's its value proposition, what is the vision for the next 30 years that we're trying to achieve here, and give them something that they can touch and feel and interact with, and that we can introduce some cool video clips or graphics or KPIs and measures and indicators as we go. So it's a living document for us. But Natalie and Craig, I'm not sure what you guys have prepared. This is still in very draft, in development, relies a lot on the material in the annual report. But I wanted to give you guys a sense of what is coming, because I know Mayor Jackie in particular has been chasing me for something more communications worthy for a while. So who's leading? Natalie and Craig? Who's doing the demo?
Craig will be doing the demo. So if Craig, you can turn it on from your screen, that would be awesome. And I can have a quick chat through. So just to reiterate what Robert said, it's very draft. I'm always nervous sending something when it's not quite polished to the standard that we want, just because I just don't want you to think that I'm happy with currently how it looks as a whole, just not quite on brand and stuff yet, but it's just a good opportunity to show you the types of things it will cover. So you've got, like Robert said, kind of one space online that succinctly kind of tells our future-proof story. So if you kind of just start, I guess, scrolling down the screen, and feel free to obviously jump into Craig if you've got anything to say.
Can you see the screen okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks.
And again, on just a bit of a disclaimer here, the photos and stuff are just placeholders for now. We need to go through and make sure we've got the right representation from across the future-proof sub-region too. So if you go down, you'll see along the top there, there is the different menu items. So all of this content, there's nothing new as such. It's either come from the future-proof strategy or the annual report or other various documentation that we have within future-proof. So the way the story maps works, which you'll see as we scroll down, it is like a scrolling kind of story, and you'll see across the top as you scroll, the little sections kind of highlight. If you want to go straight to a section along the top, then you can click on those automatically, but we'll just scroll down as we are now to show you. Also, just I think I will just kind of pause there for a bit, Craig, in terms of what this includes. It includes a variety of, so you obviously see content, so written content, and then it's got a mixture of photography, imagery, maps. I call them the real maps that, are GIS layer maps. So that's where you can click into and get a lot of the detail in there. And then you'll see some other maps that are kind of more designed maps. So they're not interactive as such, but they kind of tell a bit of a different story. So this is currently the settlement pattern maps, and so this is what I call the real map. So if you click on, Craig, you can show how it works in terms of just functionality, where you can go into the map, click on a certain area, and then open up the key. Oh, sorry. Yep, you go, Craig. You can click on.
Yep. Yeah, that's what we're trying to do. I guess I'm trying to do is, so the user would come in and be able to click on some of these areas and get some stats about the development areas in this case, where the sort of next demand and growth is. And the other map up here as well has some sort of basic stats at the district level in terms of the growth. And you can zoom around the map as well using some of these buttons which zoom into the different districts, and we can adjust I can adjust all these as well. So like Natalie was saying, it's kind of draft, so just getting a feeling of what people think and what are the areas that they're interested in. If there's particular areas, for example, we can sort of more focus on those.
Yeah, and then if you just open up the key just to show how that part works, Craig, so in each of the real maps, you can go in and see exactly what all the different colours and stuff stand for. So we're still working through exactly, there's a few different versions of maps and stuff around, so we're still making sure we've got the right, the most up-to-date version, but just so you can kind of see how it works in general on the screen. And then if we keep scrolling down, ignore this bit for now because that piece is still to come. You'll see that we've got another map that works the same way for the fast track areas. So again, you can go through and click on the different bits, and the relevant information will come up when it's. And then same thing there, same key. So we've got all of that ready to go. If we keep scrolling down, we've got so just ignore at the moment, some of the pictures and stuff don't quite fit in right, so that's where it's a bit messy. But if you click on here, you can then see the full picture. And again, this is taken from the relevant sections of our future-proof strategy. And then keep scrolling. So we've got the areas here. This is, and it goes back to that, like I said, there's a mixture of the real maps with just imagery. But at least we've got them all kind of in one place, so you'll be able to send this link to someone, and then people can get a high level overview without having to read the full strategy. We get into the future proof, the transport and the freight. So these maps have been created. So you'll see these are ones that are animation rather than interactive. So you can't click on anything, but they are an animation, kind of brings to life our story around, for this place, freight and public transport. So we've used the existing maps and just got them put into the design, our future-proof brand, and then it takes the user on a bit of a story for a couple of minutes there. So you can go through that. And then, obviously, if you don't want to read any of these, you can just scroll past them. You can pick and choose what you want to look at and what you want to find out more about. And there'll be a lot more, I guess, links and stuff on the other page for those that do want to find out more information that can really link between the future-proof website and stuff. And then just kind of closing off around kind of looking at our work beyond the sub-region, and then a bit of looking ahead. And I think that's towards the end. So that's how it's stacking up so far. As you'll see, there's still a bit of work to do to make sure it's on brand and a bit more slick. And we've got a couple more assets to come through, but we're pretty close and should have something done within the next month.
Can I just ask a question through, Chair?
No.
I just wanted to know, are they your layovers, spatial layovers? Does that cover 3D as well?
We can do 3D. We don't have any 3D examples, but you can input, and like we were that transport map there, we had that is a video, so you could do the same with a 3D.
And that will align with the buttons that you have once you click on them, you come up with the spatial. Okay.
Yeah, you could put in all sorts of stuff. I mean, I've done another story map where they actually interviewed someone and they put that as a video link, so you could hear their video about, they're talking actually about kawhia, so there's all sorts of sort of things you could do. It's just really on the content that you've got. If you wanted someone to speak as well, you could do that.
Thank you.
Yeah, so it's definitely what we provide, within the next month will be the basis, but as we continue to grow our story and grow our assets, we'll be able to add them to this one central source of truth. So it will get a lot more dynamic as we move forward, but thought let's just make sure we've got at least a base there that we can work off over the next little while. And where it's set up at the moment, because of how it's set up, we can't share a link for you to go through in detail. But once we get to the next point, we'll be able to do that. So you can have a good look through and make sure you're happy with the story and the narrative to support it.
Bruce. I love spatial analysis. Could you give us a bit more information on who your intended user is, and have they been involved in the development of the system? And will it be transportable to their GIS system?
Do you want to have a chat to that, Robert, and I can add to it?
Yeah, I can't talk to the transportable thing, but it's an ArcGIS, other than it is an ArcGIS, which is what most local authorities use. But the point is the user can get in and access it running off ArcGIS. So they don't need a GIS system. They can zip around in what we've got in there. So my priority users as your implementation advisor was definitely to build awareness and understanding of future-proof with central government officials and an easy way for them to interact with it. They're an audience of future-proof. We want them to have confidence that this region has it together and has a clear understanding of what we're trying to achieve and a clear infrastructure program. So that's one audience, and they are part of the testing because they're part of the technical, some of them are part of the technical team that we're working with to develop content. In terms of other users that will be our broader stakeholders, we haven't done user testing yet. This is like a beta version almost. Let's get it out there. Let's get feedback. Let's refine once we get feedback. But the model we followed is one that's been used by Ahuaki for Waipa District for its engagement, used for smart growth. They've got a story map like this. So we've got the feedback from people that have used similar tools, which has been really positive in terms of making, as I say, dense strategy accessible to people.
Yeah, and just to add to that, we've just tried to get a balance of, I guess, making sure it's as plain English as possible. So it is available for a wide range of stakeholders. So those obviously stakeholders that are in the detail can look at this and then go through to the strategy for more information. But this at least provides a bit of an overview for someone that might not be as close to future-proof or understand so much about it. So it provides that first point and front door story, and before getting into all the detail of other reports and resources that are available across the website.
Yeah, so you don't have a formal sort of end user group that have helped you shape this project?
No, we haven't at the moment.
Yeah. I mean, obviously I'm a little concerned about, because, I've been through these sorts of processes in a number of search programs that I've been involved in, where you have some interaction with end users, but when you eventually produce the tool, you get some interesting surprises about lack of use and lack of engagement. And often it's to do with the early stages of the process and the way they are linked into the tool. And I mean, it is essentially a tool is what you're talking about.
Yeah, it's a marketing tool.
Yeah. How are they linked to the tool from day one? Else they say, oh yeah, well, that's interesting, but we're doing this.
So I suppose this goes to how future-proof in our next iteration improve our engagement with our stakeholder community. That's why I say this is a beta version that we will refine. What we felt was it was important to get something out there now, or as soon as we could. with the view that we would adjust and refine over time as new information became available and as we got feedback about what worked for people and what didn't. What we have seen is, in terms of website usage data, is that this year's been a quiet year for future-proof. So I would expect our website, even with the improvements we've made, to have been had a significant drop-off in usage because we're not doing much engagement. It's actually held, the level of engagement with our website and the improvements that Natalie's been making along the way has held, which is not expected. Right. It's definitely not what I anticipated. So I'm expecting this will kind of maintain that holdiness, if you like.
So just to clarify, so you...
Bruce, can you just move the microphone closer, thanks?
Yeah, so just to clarify, so you're talking about government agencies and so is this more of an education tool as opposed to, like, if a subdivider was considering operating in this future-proof region and was looking for ways to move in and integrate with all of the things that are going on, would they not be a user of this tool?
That's when I say stakeholders, that's our broader stakeholder group. So yes, yeah, that's what I would expect.
Yeah, because that's the critical component of implementation, where you've got to bring them with you from day one. Yeah. In the development of the tool. Yeah. Anyway,
Yeah,
I've made my
point.
point.
Late now. You've made your point, but it's a bit late.
But I think there is really real opportunity, particularly as we go towards the next FDS, the review, because what we've used so far is using content and decisions from the past future-proof strategy. As we go into engagement and consultation around the next one, I think it'll be really cool to be able to use this as a bit of a tool to guide that conversation, and that's where there'll be a lot of engagement. Like, it'll morph from a bit of a high-level storytelling tool into that engagement tool where we can actually kind of ask questions and work with our key stakeholders more specifically using this tool and bring it to life for them that way. So the role of this tool will change over time.
Thank you. Angela.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you. I think it's a really good start for a really good visual for people who don't know who future-proof is. I do recall when I first got on council looking at all the previous videos about future-proof just to upskill myself. So I think this is a really good tool for induction for elected members as well, just to give them a really high-level view of what future-proof is and what the intention and future is for our sub-region as well. I'm really interested in that tab that beyond the sub-region, acknowledging that Regional Council is doing a full spatial strategy for the whole region. So interested in how this sort of slots in, overlays with the wider region as well. Question, is this best used on a desktop or is it mobile friendly for those who like to scroll?
Okay, I'm going to let Craig think of the answer for that last question, the one about is it just desktop or is it phone friendly, and answer that. In terms of the interregional thing, so the interregional bit that we focused on are the bits that are within future-proof's ambit. So that's Hamilton to Tauranga corridor, Hamilton to Auckland corridor. We are, I suppose it cuts to the later reports, the future-proof team and the staff that you have supporting future-proof are acutely aware that regional spatial plan's coming and that where future-proof sits in the delivery of the regional spatial plan is uncertain. So we're trying to prepare content and tools and resources that could then be used, morphed into a regional spatial plan. So this fits in part of that, because you can imagine, as Natalie says, an engagement piece using this kind of GIS tool for a full spatial plan would be incredibly useful. And that, I'm hoping that's why Waikato Regional Council have given us the resources to develop this story map, is thinking ahead to that future. Craig, did you want to talk about the access and the tools that this would work on?
Yeah, I'm going to check my phone now, but yeah, as far as I know, it's both. And there's about 3 million, apparently there's over 3 million story maps worldwide. And so they have developed them to be used on their phones. And I think that would work, but I mean, obviously with the maps, that would be something that I'd want to check just to see how that would look, like how it would look on the phone. But yeah, they have definitely looked at developing for the phone, because I mean, obviously that's a key part of how people access, this sort of information. But how it exactly looks on screen, I'll check on that.
Thank you.
Yeah, just to
but,
add to that, just to add to that too, if you look up this, Smart Growth uses Story Map as well. They're another agency that uses this, and it works really well on the phone. The only bits that are niggly are the real, what I call the real maps. They're a bit harder to use just for the nature of a map. You're never going to be able to make that work really, really well on a smaller device like that. But it's still usable. But that's why we've added in other elements as well. So not just the map, so you can still get the understanding of what the story is.
Yeah, and just to reiterate, really good start. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks.
Mayor Susan.
Yeah, I was just going to say, like, I'm delighted to see this, and I like the idea that we're kind of learning from each other around what's working and what's not working. And I just wanted to, I guess, highlight that Ahuaki has received a swathe of awards, and in particular, obviously, the more recent one from LGNZ around Super Engaged Award. And with specific reference to the digital tools used, the New Zealand Planning Institute Award as well in 2024. So look, a large part, if you have the time, you can go and see what the judges all found quite compelling in terms of those applications, and it was the use of story maps and integrated into a broader engagement piece. But I think it is definitely the way of the future. So yeah, thumbs up from me.
I just reflect a little bit more on the Ahuaki thing. So it also won, and this I think cuts to Councillor Clarkson's question a little bit, Australasian GIS Award for community impact in terms of the accessibility of the tool for Ahuaki, which we've used as kind of our North Star in terms of what we're trying to achieve here. So I'm pretty confident in it. Lyndall has been playing around and has actually got onto her phone and with her links, and it works on the phone. So you can zoom in on those maps and stuff like that on the phone. So well done, team.
Any other questions or comments in terms of the story map? And I have to say, and this is going back to 2009, when I look at the maps now, the ability to interrogate them, et cetera, compared to 16 years ago, it's certainly come on in leaps and bounds. And also in terms of the visuals, as opposed to just a very thick tome of words. So I think that certainly also aids and helps the communication. So well done, team, in terms of that, and we look forward to the final product in due course. Robert.
So the next item on my agenda is just a discussion of the terms of reference. So Bill and I have been working on a terms of reference, but we haven't got it to a stage that it's ready to present to you to be adopted. So what you've got instead is a description of the things we have taken from all of our previous conversations with this committee that we needed to tighten up or clarify in the terms of reference. And those are set out in paragraph 7. So ensuring that the purpose of FPIC is broader than merely urban growth management and extends to other spatial planning matters across the sub-region that affect our rural communities, etc., where cross-agency collaboration is required. And we've talked about energy transmission, corridors, and access to education, access to health, all of those kind of things. So we need to find the right words to wrap that into our terms of reference. We've talked a bit about, from time to time, about monitoring and reporting on performance of all of the partners in delivery of the key elements of the strategy. So this is a key role of this group is not just to spit a strategy out, but to make sure that the strategy is implemented and that we're tracking how it's implemented. So you've been receiving reports from me along the way in terms of LTP and infrastructure investment alignment and things like that, how well we've done with delivering the Hamilton to Auckland strategy. That's a function of this group, may not come through strongly enough in the terms of reference at the moment, but is really important, particularly when I look overseas at at the most effective regional deals. So if we ever do get a regional deal, the most effective regional deals have some sort of program management office that is reporting and tracking the implementation of that deal, so that there is a way of holding all of the partners, and I'm thinking here particularly the government and partners, to account for the bits of the deal that they've committed to do. We have noted in D that there may be the need for a future committee to have some more specific decision-making delegations. A pressing example, for instance, at the moment is the fast-track consenting process is going to result in changes to our future development strategy in terms of where urban development occurs. But under the current process, I would have to go through a special consultative process to change the FDS and then make a recommendation to all of your councils to adopt the change to the FDS, simply to reflect a decision by a fast-track panel. So I think there's something smart to do there in terms of how we structure our delegation, so this committee can actually make some at least minor changes to the FDS in response to changes in the operating environment. So that's one of the reasons we haven't got a draft terms of reference in front of you, because I'm going to have to engage with all of the councils next term about whether they're willing to accept some delegation directly to this committee.
Engaging with government.
And I'm engaging with government on how to make that process a little less bureaucratic, because it's their settings that drive us down that track. So Sarah Stevenson's doing some thinking for me on that. Her first job in the role of MHUD Regional Director. And then some other things that I also wanted to highlight, G and H, which are our response to the PT subcommittee changes that we talked about before. And particularly G, one of the things when we think about that Hamilton to Auckland corridor is whether FPIC should have a role or more of a role in actively promoting and leading initiatives such as Tahuia, receiving reports on Tahuia, because the rest of the RTC isn't really necessarily interested in Tahuia, and yet Tahuia is an incredibly important part of the future-proof strategy. So it feels to me certainly that it's a conversation, a place that what's the future of Tahuia conversation should be happening at a political level in addition to the RTC or ahead of the RTC, so that there's alignment. And Phil and I have been talking about how we can tighten that up in our terms of reference. So the next steps would be, I've suggested you give us some direction so Bill and I can get on with working on the terms of reference around this kind of stuff, and we can pick up the conversation with the next, in the next triennium with the new councils and the new FPIC.
Okay.
Just
Sarah,
looking
then I.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry. Do you want to
No,
go
no,
first?
go.
Sarah, then Carolyn.
Okay, thanks. In terms of delegations for this committee and how we think about joint up decision making, we've got EOI and then also Waikato Water, whatever the right name. What is the right name? Waikato Water Limited. And for example, with EOI, we're going to need to come with one voice to them in terms of our priorities for growth and spatial planning. And so that requires a really different way of working together in terms of Hamilton City Council and Waikato District Council. And I assume, it will be the same for the other councils with, your CCO. So what kind of thinking and work have you done in that regard? To what extent do we actually need to have shared decision making in the same committee, rather because our growth and then those decisions are so interlinked now, and we need to give that one very clear steer to the water company?
So there's a political element to that conversation. My recommendation would be that this committee had more delegations to be that point at which that conversation occurs. So we haven't documented that in the paper other than saying that we would be adjusting the terms of reference to bring EOI to the table in the same way as NZTA come to the table. But this is the right place for you to have that conversation with EOI and to set expectations for them instead of having to go through and with Waikato Waters, instead of having to go through multiple cycles of you making recommendations to councils and then councils having to accept or reject your recommendations and on from there.
I think it's going to, let's be frank, challenge all of us in terms of a boundaryless planning approach, because we are actually heading into a new era in a significantly new operating environment. So the current arrangements for future proof have been based on past, and the past going back some decades. And I think where we're heading is into that new paradigm. So it could well take a change in approach, in attitude, in perspective and commitment around all of the partners to quite a different way of how we do our business collectively. And I suspect that is also an expectation of those who reside in Wellington.
I might just also add an additional observation, which is we've also got our triennial agreement process that we need to think about how we key into that. And one of the other uncertainties which has caused me to press the pause button on finalising in terms of reference is also waiting to see the form of the planning legislation. So how prescriptive does that legislation become in terms of the entity that's supposed to adopt the regional spatial plan? We need to work through all of those kind of mechanics as well.
It's going to be interesting 2 or 3 years, certainly. Do you have follow-up, Sarah?
No, I just think it's a very quick comment. You know, it will be something we'll need to talk about very early in the new term, and any thinking that can be done in the meantime would put us in then good stead to kind of get rolling early in the new term. It's not simple because cost, growth always comes with some kind of cost implication, which then goes back to council's, long-term plans and financial planning and things. But we do need to find a way forward. So I don't think it's going to be easy to find that way forward. So any thinking we can do now would be really helpful.
Okay, thank you. Carolyn, and then Naya, and then me, Susan and Angela.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for raising that critical point, Sarah. I agree also that the importance is actually hitting the ground running next beginning of the triennium, so we're actually all on the same page. I just seek a bit of clarification in respect of the resolution. So is the draft terms of reference coming to a new committee to adopt, or are we being asked here to essentially adopt the terms of reference for an incoming committee?
So the recommendation is that you direct us to prepare a draft terms of reference that's based on the matters we've discussed here, and that would be presented to the first committee of the next triennium. So we're not asking you to adopt anything, just to direct us to do some thinking on things.
Yes. Okay, yeah. Thank you for that.
Naya.
Yeah, through the chair, I think it's fair to say that changes are coming, and we're certainly dealing with that with the process of health within Tamaki Makaurau. But the option that we have today, not just to make a difference, we can design it to make a difference. And when you design it to make a difference, we have a lot of say in it. So I'm hoping that we don't just discuss it as making a difference. I'm hoping that we design it to make a difference. Kia ora.
And just as a follow-up to that comment, Naya, I think that's why it's been key in terms of having future-proof, having that continued engagement with government, both at a ministerial level But also key to that is in terms of that ongoing engagement with officials. And that's why it's also key of having the likes of Vanessa from DIA and Sarah from MHUD and Andrew from NZTA around this table. So the opportunity to hopefully be part of that influence as things get developed. Mayor Susan.
Yeah, look, kia ora, taking on that whole, or picking up on the sort of the boundaryless discussions and notions. I really like the general flavour of the potential changes you've mooted there, but taking into account the boundaryless way of seeing these things, the broader context, spatial planning, and Wellington's very clear push for a regional voice. I just think maybe we should flag, and I'm not saying that we make any amendments here, but perhaps into the future we consider some form of connectivity to the Waikato Mayoral Forum and the triennial agreement that they will work up at the beginning of next triennium too. I think it's important to have some visibility over what the broader collective is thinking is important as well.
Yep.
So I don't expect there to be any amendments made here, but just on the perhaps further thinking kind of notes into next year.
Good points, Susan. Yep. Angela.
Yeah, agree with what's been said so far. But yeah, just picking up on those points, G and H, I think that's really important strategically moving forward, just to strengthen the links between Regional Transport Committee and FPIC, because we know that through RTC, that's where the funding comes from through the NRTF. So that's really important. And alongside the regional deals, whatever that might look like in the future as well. Connectivity up to Auckland, it would be fantastic to have, more advocacy for Te Hui moving forward, since it is moving into such a critical stage within the next 9 months. So just to raise the awareness of that as well, and the advocacy coming from such a forum as FPIC, just means it's not just a project, that it is strategically important to what we're trying to achieve with growth in housing and resilience and connectivity as well. Lastly, I think we have really achieved a lot within this committee in the way of relationships and working together really well this term. So I think moving forward, that's going to be even more important, alongside that boundaryless thing, that we're not just patch protecting, but that we are thinking broader than our boundaries as well. So really agree with where these terms of reference are heading. And thank you for that pushing us to, expand where we're going. So thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Adrian.
Yeah, and I guess it is following on from actually Susan and Angela's comments, is that when we look back at where we've come from, and a lot of us are only new on this triennium, but you sort of think that what's happened in the past and who we are here today and how we're collaborating is that we may represent our districts on this forum, but we have to widen our perspective and take the blinkers off from our district and look at the greater strategic good of the area. And the greatest risk to this organisation is when parochialism gets in the way. And that is, one of those interesting dynamics that I hope we can, because the collaboration is more important than ever. You've referred to it in your annual report, Bill, and that is the future of this group, really. And by bringing in the regional focus, I absolutely support what Susan said, because we are a sub-region, but those lines that define the sub-region are again just a arbitrary line, and the flow of people and that is very important from our neighbouring councils that aren't in this group. They are an important part of it, and as is with iwi and the relationships we have across the rohi. So I just think this is an evolution. I know the waters is an interesting piece, but I think we also have to remember that just because it's going into a CCO doesn't mean that our councils aren't closely connected to that CCO. That it won't be something at a distance, that we will, through the Mayoral Forum, have our eyes over what that CCO, what the priorities are and the strategic steps are. So, no, it's a good way forward. Okay.
Any other comments or questions at this point? Angela?
Yeah, sorry, just came to mind, that interregional piece. I know that we had a great meeting with Smart Growth recently. Does that sort of feature in the terms of reference?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, and just picking up, and I just want to pick up the point Carolyn made earlier on in terms of that membership from the new public transport subcommittee. We'll pick that up as part of the membership elements of the new terms of reference. So it'll be highlighted there, together with, and we've touched on it earlier, in terms of representation from both of the new waters entities. Because at the end of the day, it's the what's in the future development strategy and future proof that's helping give direction to those new water entities in terms of growth and all of that, and all the issues around servicing and fast track, etc. So we'll certainly be picking those matters up as part of the membership. So and the intent is for those members in terms of non-voting members. And at the end of the day, we don't get down to having a vote that's 6-7. If we did, I'd be leaving it on the table and be having some discussions. So the input is more important, in my view, than the voting arrangement. Okay, have you got anything else? You got enough guidance now on that?
That's fabulous guidance, and I'm just mindful of time and that I'm going to lose one of my presenters for the next items by 11:30. So I might just take the rest of my report as read.
Okay. Are there any any other questions of Robert on the rest of his report? You don't appear to be.
Just
Okay, so
one very quick one. How much did we spend working on the water strategy to date, and will any of that work be usable or be kind of done work?
So off the top of my head, I can't remember, but it would have been in the area of 50-odd thousand-ish. Yes, it will be usable material. So the value we get from it so far is we've got a very good compilation of all of the water-related matters that have been raised through everyone's LTP processes that we can pull together into a single bundle, which is a resource for EOI as it thinks about its water services plan. And we've got a whole lot better alignment at a technical working level around what are the key issues that we would want to go ahead with or need to address coming forward with the review of Te Ture Whaimana, the freshwater plan change coming out of WRC and those other issues. So it's not wasted money by any means. But now's not the right time to move forward with that work when there's so much other stuff going on in the water space.
okay, so recommendations being moved by Mayor Susan. If I can have a seconder for those. Angela, there's no further discussion. I'll put those 5 recommendations, and the new committee will obviously at its first meeting consider those revised terms of reference. So if there's nothing further, I'll put that. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. And thanks for your input, particularly in terms of the role of the committee going forward. So we'll now move to item 7.2, and this are the spatial studies update. And we've got Jim and Paul to present on those.
So I'll just do a wee introduction. Mainly a reminder for the committee that the 3 pieces of work that Jim and Paul are going to talk to us about are key actions that came out of the future development strategy. So if you hark back to the future development strategy hearings, a lot of submissions from developers in North Waipa seeking to have quite a lot of additional land included into the settlement pattern, but also those submitters saying, but we'd really like to understand what is the master plan, what's the vision for how this area is going to develop so that we can think about how we integrate our development plans with that. So that's the North Waipa study. And then a lot of submissions from the Matamata Piako part of the Rohe, talking about, well, talk to us about the Hamilton to Tauranga corridor and what's that going to mean for us in terms of development pressures and development expectations along that corridor. And then a whole bunch of submissions from the retirement sector saying that we needed to open up quite significant areas of land in rural hamlets and rural villages to accommodate the wave of retirees who would all want to live in a rural setting. So our leaders on these pieces of work now are going to tell us where we're at and give you some insight on how our thinking's emerging.
Jim. Oh. So the red means I'm speaking. I was looking for green. Good morning, everyone. I'm Jim Ebenho, the Future Proof project director for these projects, and we've got Paul from the Regional Council to talk about retirement living in a minute. I'll take the report largely as read. It is an update. Where we're up to now, in brief, is the stage 1 engagement has occurred. We now have revised vision and outcome statements based on that feedback, which are there in the report. And we finalized the gap analysis as a stock take as the basis for the rest of the study. So, and where we're really up to now is we've got draft scenarios and options about to be ready to talk to the key stakeholders about in October or early November. And that's the really exciting stuff. That's where the rubber hits the road. There's a little bit of it in the report, and I have a few slides on that as well. I think the really important thing is in paragraphs 22 and 23, where we're talking about scenarios. It's important for stakeholders and really everyone to be aware that these scenarios are not predictions, and none of them are preferred yet, but they're illustrative. If we get to a point of a preferred scenario or a preferred hybrid scenario, then the question becomes, well, what are the options? What are around increasing the likelihood of that coming to pass? Again, no guarantees. So are there other considerations around, well, are there some things we can do that would make sense to provide resilience across all the scenarios? Or if there's a scenario we really don't like collectively, is there something we can do to sort of mitigate that as much as possible? So really probably a useful exercise in terms of looking at all those scenarios. So what I'll do now is share my screen with a few slides, not a lot. You're not currently in a meeting. Well, I was. Sorry. Okay, thank you. Great. Great. Thank you, Lyndall. If you just move to the next slide and the next one after that. So this is the next slide with circles on it. These are the scenarios, the draft scenarios we're working through for the North Waipa South Hamilton study. And so with any scenario exercise, you tend to have that baseline. There's an option. The next option is around staged rollout over a 30-year period. And I would say this is kind of the planner's dream, or at least some planner's dream, which is everything is laid out and kind of goes according to plan in a logical staged way. Important to test that scenario with as well as look at other ones. And scenario 3, we started using sort of filmic titles, but Everything Everywhere All at Once is really sort of more around aligning with the government direction to allow more flexibility, to allow things to proceed out of sequence if certain criteria are met, et cetera. So, in providing that more competitive land market. There's a lot of detailed assumptions in this. I won't unpack that today, but that's the gist of that scenario. Scenario 4 is kind of, again, going back to the public sector being in the lead, but leading with the enabling infrastructure, something like a development corporation, et cetera, which is getting things in place and then trying to get ahead of the actual development, but still very much pushing versus scenarios 2 or the baseline. And then scenario 5, we've called the Green Gateway. It really the title probably needs to broaden, because this is around not just environmental protection and enhancement, turning up the dial on that, but around cultural and cultural and heritage as well. And so it's not a non-growth scenario, but probably the balance is turning the dial on those other areas. So those are the scenarios that we've had like project team workshop on, and that's what will be developed and brought through the future proof for stage 2 engagement. So that's the next steps. And that one, I'll pause after the Hamilton to Tauranga one to answer any questions before retirement living. Those of you who were at the meeting we had at Matamata a few weeks ago with the smart growth representatives would have seen this, so I won't go through it in detail, but the scenarios there that our economic analysts have helped us with are looking essentially, the important thing that the comment I didn't make in Matamata that I really want to make clear today is that all these scenarios take as a given high growth scenario. So this was specifically looking at what additional growth might not have been modeled yet that might arise from these transport improvements that we're now seeing or that we're now seeing planned. So that's to help us future-proof partners get even more ahead of the curve if that growth ends up being more or different than the baseline. So 3 scenarios there. You can read for yourselves, but essentially the metro ends getting proportionally more of that growth, the sort of middle part of the corridor getting some more proportionally more of that growth, and then a more wild card type scenario. Don't know where, but let's say it's outside an existing urban area, and that includes something that kind of would dwarf an existing crossroads type settlement or village. And if the next slide, please. The findings are around that those numbers may look small in absolute terms in terms of the additional growth, but they are on top of the significant high growth projections. And for communities like Matamata, to some degree as well, Tiro and Putarudu, proportionally that could be quite a bit, particularly under those central gravity or new node scenarios. Just look at the impact in the future on Ohinawai, for example, of Sleepyhead. And I think I probably won't go through in detail these next, Linda, if you just don't mind advancing through these, but I won't read them out. They just do illustrate that in the metro scenario, the Hamilton and Tauranga at either ends have more growth. And the next slide, you'll see more in Matamata and what we're calling the Smart Growth Western Corridor, or sorry, what Smart Growth calls its Western Corridor. So it's in the central part, but still kind of towards the ends, but quite a bit from Matamata proportionally. And then the final scenario, the new node 1, that number of potential new dwellings for Matamata, and again, that's above what's already in their high growth scenario. That's quite considerable. If we don't have a Sleepyhead type scenario in the true sense where the residential development goes in some new rural location, we're expecting the townships to pick that up. So that's where that impact comes from there. And the last 2 slides are really just to illustrate that none of these areas are, including existing settlements, are unconstrained. We've got no-go areas. These are the layers from our existing future-proof work, as well as what Smart Growth has done. We've got the no-go slide, and the really colorful one is the go carefully summary, which, as you know, with go carefully, it doesn't mean no growth can't happen, but really leads to what is truly my final slide, which is the preliminary findings consistent with future-proof direction so far in future-proof strategy. Preference would, from the work so far, is that we're saying newer urban areas would not be required. As much as possible, attempt to steer the growth to relatively unconstrained areas within the corridor. Because nothing's truly unconstrained, there will have to be probably some addressing of constraints, be it infrastructure or environmental. So those are really just preliminary findings. Most of the work that's been done so far is that sort of number and map generation. And again, the next stage of this work is stage 2 engagement around these findings to date. I'll pause there before I hand over to Paul on retirement.
Okay, thanks, Jim. Robert?
So just following up in terms of the conversations with Smart Growth. So Smart Growth are doing just checking our modelling against their modelling at the moment for that Western corridor. We're also working with Smart Growth around scoping up a piece of work which is actually talking to the major landowners and developers along the corridor about what their intentions are. So we haven't commissioned that work, but we will be commissioning that, and that'll kind of provide a counterbalance to the economic modelling assessment in terms of what developer expectations might be, and that might get a little bit more specific in terms of what locations development are at risk of development, if you like.
Okay, I'll open up for any questions or comments in terms of what's been presented on both studies. Carolyn.
Thank you. And thank you for the report, Jim, the work done. This is a little outside the scope of future-proof thinking, but I'm just interested to see whether there's been any consideration gone into land use change and forestry conversions in the western part of Waikato, 25 years from here, using that freight corridor through to port. When it's looking for harvest. So, and obviously Path Waikato District, you probably have an appreciation of what we've got by way of conversions in our western part. So is there any thinking around the increase in freight movement from forestry in respect of this conversation?
Yep, thanks for the question. I think Robert might have something to add to it, but just briefly, the NZTA will be embarking on a study shortly, looking probably at the transport drivers around that corridor. And I know there is work going on at the Upper North Island level around flows to and from ports. So not specifically for this study, we haven't done a unique investigation into that particular issue, but we'd be looking to plug into that. So how much we've done so far depends on what some of that information has been available, but it's not a deep dive. So.
Robert.
Okay.
Yeah, nothing to add to that. We're all waiting for NZTA to get underway with its study, but that will need to be a key consideration for them. I suppose I will make the observation, I have been working as the implementation advisor with developers with the horticultural sector in the north of the Franklin district and the south of the Auckland district around transport connections around Pocono. The forestry bit hasn't been part of the conversation, but there's a clear concern around the access to markets for produce that we're working on.
Yeah. That gives me confidence that it's still included in the thinking. Thank you.
Sarah.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks so much for the work so far. I am just interested in terms of thinking around how this all integrates with transport and say for North Waipa, South Hamilton, it talks about a focus around industrial and leveraging off the airport. What, in terms of planning in a way that doesn't continue to exacerbate congestion, can you talk a little bit more about your thinking in that space?
Well, so far this is part of the integrated future-proof program of work. So as our starting point, Metro Spatial Plan and the public transport business case, those are things that maybe under certain scenarios things happen faster or in different sequence, but so yeah, that is a key consideration. And some of the outcome statements which have been in some of the previous reports and are on the website, the outcome statements there's one called Easy to Get Around. That does refer. So sorry, was it around transport in particular and active modes?
Yes. So for example, say we end up with lots of industrial development. I mean, are we going to, is a core part of that to have public transport to get people to their jobs and back to where they've come from, or I'm just interested in a bit more detail around how this all links together.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's the gold standard is sort of extending the thinking from the existing work that's been done on the Metro Spatial Plan within within the umbrella of the future-proof strategy to do that as much as possible. But we're not to that level of detail yet as to exactly where those routes would go or what would be needed. So
Yeah.
because it's a high-level concept plan, it will be more than just, oh, let's put this land use here. It would be integrated with, and how might that be serviced? But we're just not quite there yet. I don't know, Robert, if you want to.
Yeah, I might chip in a little bit there. So the, as Jim said, we're playing with scenarios, and in some of those scenarios, we requires us to speed up delivery of the Metro Spatial Plan Southern Corridor in terms of BRT to the airport. If you remember, our current priorities are to focus north and east inside Hamilton. But if we see faster growth, so that everything everywhere all at once scenario, or growth that we don't have a lot of control over, then suddenly to manage those congestion issues, we would need to pivot, particularly post completion of Hamilton Southern Links. So the scenarios start to play through that kind of thinking with people. Yeah.
Okay, and in terms of the study that NZTA is looking to do for the Tauranga Hamilton corridor, sorry if you've covered this, but where does rail fit into that, if at all?
Definitely part of the scope that they've described to us.
Yeah.
So they're in the discussions we've had with them, they've talked about understanding the importance of the freight task in particular. So their first focus is freight and servicing Ruakura. But within that comes the broader conversation of rail for other purposes like public transport. So it's in the mix. And their idea of their strategy is that it is a 30 to 50 year strategy for the corridor. NZTA are quite keen to start identifying what's next after the RONs so that they're starting to develop future projects.
Okay.
And I might just add to that, if I may, that one of the things we're looking at in our study is to inform the NZTA work by saying, for example, some of these settlements that are on rail lines, not just the ones that are at highway crossroads, some of these this rail infrastructure could be quite a logical place for new development to grow. So it's part of the spatial study thinking.
Nanaia.
Kia ora. I just want to ask, is there any more information in terms of the cultural aspect?
Thank you, Nanaia. The published information, so to speak, not so much. We've been having the ZUI that have been described in the report, but so far what we've put together is maps, including those layers, those culturally sensitive layers, et cetera. The next stage will have more on that based on some of those discussions that have happened recently and more. Thank you.
Did you get enough feedback from those ZUIs that would align with all that?
The ZUI were very useful in terms of confirming that we'd looked at the right documents and drawn some of the right high-level findings around what Mana Whenua are concerned about in the corridor and in the study area. The specific implications in particular areas, that probably won't come out until we have some draft scenarios to test, and we'll see which ones best reflect, match those aspirations. Thank you.
Kia ora.
Angela.
Yeah, thank you. Probably just sort of following on from Councillor Sarah's comments around public transport to get workers to where they need to go would be the increased flights out of Hamilton Airport as well. And I know we did have the Flex, which didn't really work in its current iteration. But there's been some talk from the community about servicing the airport for flights as well. So just wanted to flag that as well.
Okay, there's nothing further. Thanks, Jim. Paul, welcome. I don't know if you've presented to us before, so. Retirement living.
Kia ora. Morning, everybody. Thanks for having me. Seeing if I've got the power on the web. Should be able to control it. we go. It's coming up now, hopefully. Yeah. So I think just to recap, this is a study that FPIC and Futureproof commissioned last year through the Future Development Strategy hearings. And I think, as the chair's previously mentioned, there's been somewhat of a paradigm shift in that time, since that time. But one of the concerns was we didn't understand retirement living or the plethora of villages that seemed to be applied for last year and the year before and this year, and what our future-proof response would be in terms of integrated land use planning. And I think one of the challenges were a lot of these proposals were in more marginal peripheral locations in rural areas, not neatly aligned to the future-proof settlement pattern. Obviously, as I said, that was last year, and we've had something called Fast Track come along and hit us over the head with a big hammer and say, well, let's provide for everything everywhere if we can, as long as there's infrastructure in place and somebody's going to pay for it, hopefully the developer. But it's still an important study because I think these applications are still coming in. And I'll take us through the highlights and where we're at. But like I said, I think at the back of our minds is the fact that we are in a bit of a new world now through going for housing growth and that boundaryless approach to planning, and where you might see applications for retirement villages, and are they any different to an application for residential development? Just putting that out there. But I think it's been an interesting study because I think all of us will be there at some point in our lives. Are we going to move house? Are we going to move in with family if they want us when we're that age? Are we going to move town? Are we going to downsize in our local community, or are we going to try and have a place in a retirement village? Because there's lots of those around. I'm just seeing if my slides, there's a bit of a delay. So just on the key study objectives, there was a couple of key strands. One of them was what I'll take you through briefly now, the demand assessment. What is the demand for retirement living? Supply and market coverage. So our consultants formative basically looked at supply, what I call pipeline supply. So how many of these things do we have at the minute in the region? Are they for care beds? Are they villas? Where are they located? How many are there? What's in the consented pipeline? So that's the supply side. It's really looking at what's out there at the minute. And then the demand side is looking at the population stats high projections and looking at what percentage over a certain age group, in this case 65. You could go under and over, but the consultants would use the 65 plus as a general rule of thumb. And then we look at what we call market penetration. And for those of you like, what does that mean? Basically, that's what percentage of over 65s are likely to want to go into a retirement village. And so the private sector base their models of operation on, are we going to get a certain penetration over the next 5-10 years? And again, there's unders and overs, but as a rule of thumb, roughly we say about 15% at the minute of over 65s are looking at retirement village as an option. And some developers or some operators, whether they're Ryman, Oceana, MetLife Care, they will adjust their model of their business based on what they see through retirement village association stats and what have you. But that's when I say market penetration is what I mean. And then that third green, the green is just saying what we've done is looking at preferences and needs. So we've got the operator side, but one of the key things of this study was to look at future residents in the region over 45 years of age, what they think they're going to do in retirement. And then we also interviewed some specific operators like Ryman, Oceana, Tamahiri, those people doing those sort of operations in the region right now. We had a couple of structured interviews, and I can show you the brief results going through. It's a bit of a lag. Real apologies for that. Oh, you're sharing. Thanks, Lyndall. So the demand projections really, and I didn't think you'd be able to see that because I can't see that, but I'll do my best, is basically we're all getting older, there's a growing population, and the sub-region is predicted to rise from 60,000 people in retirement age to 113,000 by 2048. Please don't ask me why we landed on 2048, but that seems to be where we have landed for this study. This is an accepted fact, and it's even mentioned in the latest government policy statement on housing and urban development. So the government are recognising there's a growing population and there's a bit of a challenge about providing future accommodation for those that are getting older and where they're going to live. So it's quite pertinent that this study's ongoing right now. Of those over 65, 14% in Matamata-Piako, 21% Waipa, 23% in Waikato, 42% in Hamilton. So there we go. That gives you, again, a rough breakdown. I'm sure there's unders and overs in those percentages. But in terms of demand by 2048, Hamilton City, for example, based on that table, will need the most retirement units, followed by Waikato, Waipa, and Matamata-Piako. So those numbers are effectively the number of village demand projections by unit. So what the consultants have done there is they've taken Stats New Zealand high projection. They've looked at the penetration rate over 65 plus. So again, looking at of those over 65, what percentage are going to go into retirement units? And then they take an assumed occupancy rate based on Retirement Village Association databases. So we assume about 1.25 people per unit. And that gets you those demand numbers there. So it's a little bit complicated, but not too complicated. If you look at in that table where it says status quo medium, high share medium. So when we say status quo, we say that the penetration rate is around 15% at the minute. And then the next column down and row, we say high share medium. That means a higher share penetration rate. So not 15%, it might be 20% of over 65-year-olds. And that's based on medium growth projections. And then the next two rows are status quo. So again, 15% market penetration rate at a high projection series of population. And then the bottom row is a high penetration rate. So assuming we get well over 20% of 65-year-olds and the projection of the population growth of over 65-year-olds is high. So a lot of this is predicated on assumptions. I just want to put that out there. But that's what those tables are. And then the next table, please, Lyndall, is the key table, really. There was about 20 tables in this document, just FYI, so I've only landed on 2. Otherwise, it would have been a very, very long presentation. But the good news is the largest supply, based on those projections, is in Waipa district. So if you look at that top row where it says status quo medium, if you're in the green, green means good. That means there's a lot of supply or a sufficiency of supply. It's a bit like housing when we did the housing and business assessment. So we're saying Waipa have got sufficiency right out to 2048, whereas unfortunately Waikato district only have sufficiency to 2023. And then in 2028, if we're looking at the top one again in Waikato, that's saying we're 70 units short by 2028. So again, there's a lot of assumptions here. Where we go down to that row that says future-proof, the dark green is quite key because that's saying under status quo, market penetration and a medium growth projection, we're pretty good in the future-proof region to 2033. And then if we go down one again, please, Lyndall, to the high share, if we're assuming a high penetration rate, so more than 15% of over 65-year-olds wanting to go into retirement living, we're okay to 2028, which isn't too far away. And then the ones below that are obviously you're okay to 2033. And it all depends on projection series and what that assumed market penetration rate is. I think one of the key facts to take away is the future-proof column is looking at obviously the entirety of the sub-region, but it doesn't really take into account the unders and overs by specific TAs or specific hamlets or regions. So it might look good for the wider region, but demand is a bit more localized than that, shall we say. So it might look good, but you might have a big shortage of those people wanting to move to Telmutu or Matamata. So that's just something to take away there. But I think based on the tables that the consultants are giving us, we're pretty good out into 2028. YPAR's okay to 2048. So what does all that mean? I think what it's telling us is right now in future-proof region, we are looking good for the tune of 1,000, that red circle units, up into 2028. The one proviso I would say, though, is right now there's a lot of fast-track applications on the books, and they are providing significantly larger number of retirement units than these consultants have modeled. And the other thing is the consultants have modeled a certain size of retirement village, around 7 hectares, whereas what we're seeing through fast track is, again, significantly larger comprehensive developments of 50 plus hectares. So if I was asked right now, and we haven't finalized the study, I'd say there's a bow wave of supply coming through, and that might see the region good out into 2028, maybe even 2033. It may even provide more supply than we actually need, but that will drop off, I suspect, at some point. Oh, so there we go. If I haven't confused you, I've confused myself. But I think,
Thank you.
what we're saying is the demand's out there right now. I would say it's being provided for through a lot of these applications we're seeing, because they're not just providing for 20 units or 30 units. These are large village operators, and they're exploiting that early signs of demand, probably out from now till 2038. Next slide, please, Linda, before I lose the audience. Waikato Residents Survey. Now, this is very interesting. Again, very just key takeouts. So what is it that people are actually seeking? I think the key takeout is probably the very last bullet point on the right-hand side, is what we're seeing is, despite this rise in demand for retirement living, a lot of the respondents, and that we got a good response, over 1,000 residents were surveyed in the future-proof region, over 45 years of age. It was all done online, SurveyMonkey, structured interviews. Assessment was done by the good people here at the region. But shout out to Kaingora and Josephine, who I see is online, because our partners actually paid for this, Kaingora, and I think it was very helpful, and they organized the consultants and the online survey. So just a bit of a plug there. But yeah, the key takeout was, notwithstanding the demand and what we're seeing currently come through the books through things like fast track and other applications, over half the participants we surveyed were saying, well, yeah, we're quite happy to stay within the urban area, but having a rural setting isn't a key priority for us. One of the key priorities was actually housing that's low maintenance, high quality. It wasn't the fact that they were looking for a very rural setting. So again, half expected to retire between the ages 65 and 69. Interestingly, some villages are lowering that age to 55 now, which is a bit scary, but they're looking at a different style of market. So you can move into a retirement village and still have a part-time job and 2 cars and a villa. So, but that's not the main trend. It's still over 65s. But again, it's not an easy one size fits all. But the key was low maintenance housing. Participants want to be close to shops, facilities, and amenities. But I think the key takeout was they weren't necessarily looking for that rural idyll and the majestic plains of the Waikato as a priority for them. So on the other side, the operators were saying that's what was being demanded. So there's a bit of a tension between what residents are saying. Again, a bit of a skewed survey, 3/4 were female. It's interesting actually seeing the survey size, 3/4 were New Zealand European, which is a shame we couldn't get more diverse, but that's the way it was. And over half the sample said they were not currently retired. But most of that age bracket we're expecting to be in that sort of, retirement, and as you'd expect, 65 plus. Next slide, please, Linda. This is the last slide. So this was the industry interviews. So who did we speak to? Again, it was organised through Kaingora. Urban Advisory Consultants conducted it because it was more of a hands-off. Quite a long interview, an hour interview with some of these providers like Ryman, MetLife Care, Tamahiri, Oceana. And we asked them a range of things like, what do you see the future being in the retirement village market? What sort of size villages? What's the typology? Are you just building villas or apartments or townhouses? Do you provide for assisted care? What's the robustness of your model if the market falls off a cliff in 10 years? It wasn't worded like that, but that's the kind of the questions we were asking. They certainly said there's a shift towards the expectation for more spacious and amenity-rich living options, which reflects what's coming through in fast track. So this is big villages with large open spaces. You'd expect the full suite, bells and whistles with gymnasiums and community centres, physios, Pilates centres. These are big, big businesses now. So a lot of the operators are saying that's what people are demanding. This generation moving into retirement want to see that. They want to see villas that provide for work from home options, and they want to have visitor facilities on site for their families so they can have a coffee when they. So that traditional perception of what a retirement village is like, and myself included, I think is changing. It's largely driven by the current baby boomer demographic. So that's people who do have the equity and are fortunate enough to have a home right now that they may be able to sell to enter into a retirement village. Some operators were acknowledging that that would be an issue in the future. And not all operators were using that license to operator model, which is what you read in the press, and there's issues of buying yourself out, etc. So a couple of operators were looking at freehold and actually looking to the future for a rental model. So some of that larger development would potentially go back to the private market, but not all, I would say. I say that was the minority of people interviewed. And site selection. Now, this is an interesting thing because, again, one of the primary reasons we're seeing retirement villages in our rural areas, and in most cases on high-class soils or highly productive land, is because retirement village operators are seeking a lot larger sites than could ordinarily be provided in the urban area. There's very few places in the urban area in our settlement and the strategy that's going to provide 60-hectare sites. Now, that's the market, but they were saying that's the preference at the minute. They're going large. They're looking for provision of more facilities than just the individual building. It isn't to say you still can't do that in the urban area. And one of our case studies shows in Hamilton City, for example, Rotatuna, opposite Rotatuna High School. So one of the few 4-story developments in that part of the city is a retirement village. It was planned for in the town centre concept plan. So You can do it in an urban area setting. Ideally, you'd master plan it early, is my view, as part of an emerging growth area. But right now, the primary driver is the site. And also, I would say, is a lot easier for them to have that blank slate in terms of what we call reverse sensitivity effects. They're not moving into an existing residential area. So those are the reasons given from the industry, really. So that's where we are. Those are the key takeouts. And the final slide, please, Linda, thank you, is really pulling this all together. We just really want to finalize a few case studies for you, but we're aiming to bring this back into a more fulsome report for the next FPIC in December. But that's it, really. I'll stop ranting on. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Paul. I've got a lineup in terms of Angela, Bruce, Nanaya, Adrian, and Carolyn in that order.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for the study. Really fascinating findings that you've come across. Yeah, I just sort of had a question around the ethnicity. I suppose we're seeing a skew towards New Zealand European within what you've found out. But we also know that population forecast is for a more diverse population moving forward. So yeah, just sort of interested in where that's going. Yeah, the second thing, so not really a question on that first one. The second thing is I know that we often have questions from existing retirement villages wanting bus services to meet their needs. And it's not often as simple as they would put it out there to be, that we can just quickly change bus routes to service them. So just wondering how we can sort of get ahead of that and front foot that. I know that there's developer contributions for infrastructure, but where we could sort of head with getting some sort of contributions for bus services to service their villages, because obviously from the data that's what people want, that amenity, shops, transport, connectivity. So yeah, is there any sort of option there? Or
yeah, thanks, Angela. I mean, some good questions. I mean, on the first issue, yeah, I think the survey is quite skewed. We can't really do much about that, but I think there is certainly from a government perspective, and just reading the GPS, the government policy statement, Housing and Urban Development, that came out a few weeks ago, quite quietly, I might add, but it came out, and there is a big focus on Papakanga Māori housing provision, and that was good to see. I think it is something I'd like to just, I mean, we do have Waikato Tainui on our staff working group, but I'd like to get a little bit more of a flavour in that for the study, because a lot of the operators were saying the bulk of their market was Western European. They are unashamedly saying that's what it is. That's their clientele. But I think you're right. I mean, I think central government are acknowledging that now more than I've seen before, and it's certainly something that the region have supported in their submission. We'd like to see more detail around that come through in package 4, which is looking at going for housing growth, but also how we provide for that option in terms of typologies and affordability for Māori housing and that demographic. Second issue, yes, I mean, I think, and I know Robert and Jim asked me to have some thought about what does all this mean, and I guess you've got that paradigm shift of boundaryless planning, but I still think the key principles of requiring or insisting retirement villages are well located to PT bus routes and services, and if they're not, what they're doing to provide for that. There's a whole, I think, as people will know, there's a whole separate discussion around what councils can do in charging DCs, or even through the future development levy system that's coming out shortly. I think that would be a good option to look at how operators are improving PT in the localities that they're proposing to go in. But yeah, I think that's planning 101 submission really when looking at retirement villages. Is a lot of these are in those marginal locations that aren't neatly located on PT or bus routes, and they don't have that connectivity. And some of the industry operators say, well, we do put on a driving Miss Daisy type bus that will take you to Countdown, but I'm not quite sure that's the answer. That's certainly not robust in terms of a planning argument. But yeah, I think that you're onto something there. There is something that through future infrastructure considerations that should be part of the assessment. Retirement villages or residential development.
Yeah, I think with, people living longer and being more healthy, they don't want just a once a week shopping trip. They want that freedom to be able to pick their own path, really. And that's the feedback that I've had from residents at several retirement villages, especially within Hamilton.
Just on that, Phil, did you want to comment on that PT matter? Oh, we think someone off.
I think it's a really good conversation, and I think the parameters of funding have already been noted there in terms of the development contribution system. The one thing I would add is that from a customer experience perspective, this is a really important future user group for public transport, and we need to be planning systems and routes and networks around where those demands are and where they will be. And the challenge is that if they are in peripheral areas, it makes the planning cost and the cost of delivery of a network greater and greater over time. However, if we were to achieve good modal shift for this group of customers, it has a really good impact on our off-peak demand, and it rounds out bus routes far more than them being busy in the morning and busy in the evening. So it's a really important part of our future network thinking and planning. And as the numbers on those slides show, this is a growing audience group for us.
Thank you. Angela, you go.
Yeah, thank you. Just to sort of circle back to the ethnicity thing, we've mentioned Māori, we've mentioned European, but there's also that growing other ethnicities as well, who tend to prefer multi-generational living as well. So just wanting to make sure that they're in the picture as well. So yeah, and I'll leave it there because there's lots of other questions, but thank you.
Thank you. Bruce.
Oh, yeah. Well, seeing I'm in the cohort, I felt compelled, absolutely compelled to ask you a couple of questions. It was a fascinating presentation, and I really like the data-rich part of it too. There's nothing worse in your mailbox, actually, than there is possibly a candidate's flyer who's running against you, or the retirement village flyer that constantly fills your newspaper and your post box. Anyway, I've got that out of the way. I'm really interested in the more dynamic part of the story, and I'm wondering, because I sense the data, you're talking the data about, the local requirement and the local population and the matching processes of that. But this is a nationwide operation, isn't it? And some of the people you're surveying also have branches all around the country. And I'm interested in knowing, are we gaining our market share, or are we losing our market share? Because there is a common tendency for people to retire to places that they came from originally, or to seek out particular climates that may not be as difficult as the one we live in. So can you give us any sense of the dynamism of the model? Because, I mean, is it happening like this everywhere? Are we an attractor, or are we contributing a flow of the baby boomers to go to other places as well?
I was hoping you didn't ask me that question, but it's a good one. I think at the time of the report, we were kind of odds even, if I could say it like that. So 3 or 4 years ago, it looks like we were an attractor. But I think right now, again, I keep going on about that penetration rate, but we're on around 13%, 13 to 14%, the report said. Like, is slightly higher in the South Island, 15–16%. I mean, again, it's a generality, but we're not 3%. So we're kind of in a sort of a good place. That changes. I wouldn't be surprised with the changes in the wider housing ecosystem and, you know, house prices being a bit flat right now. People don't feel as though they potentially have that equity to do the jump. So it really does depend, I think, on wider externalities in terms of the attractiveness of the Waikato, but it does seem that it's holding from what the consultants report have said. Whether that will continue to be the case, I don't know. The other problem is, and you see this, and I won't stray off into the industrial demand and all that because it's a whole different can of worms, but there's that induced demand as well. So this is very much a projections-based model. Population grows by X, over 65 penetrate this amount of the market. But obviously, if something gets built, one of the challenges I see with this work is retirement villages don't necessarily ring fence to the communities that they're building in. So you could have a lovely retirement village in Matamata, but I'm pretty sure not everybody in Matamata will have the option of moving in there. So they might pull in attraction from those in the South Island. So it's a bit more complex than that. And I think that is one of the challenges. They don't necessarily meet local demand. And that's for a number of reasons. And I guess this is the policy challenge, how much you get involved in a commercial model. Because as a future proof, we can't control license to occupy. You can control size and scale and siting where these things go, but the commercial model is not something you'd ordinarily get into. But not everyone can enter into these models. I think it is valid, and I've heard it raised around the table here, that we look at the robustness of these proposals once the retirement living demand potentially drops off. What happens to these facilities then? I think that is a valid policy consideration.
We've gone through that process and are abandoned retirement villages. So I think that's something to think about too. Absolutely. Thank you for that.
So I've got Nanaya, Mayor Adrian, Carolyn, and Mayor Susan.
Tēnā koe, tō kōrero me tō whakaaro, he marama mai, au me mātou katoa, I roto tēnei kaupapa o tātou. I just wanted to ask, firstly, I totally agree, one size doesn't fit all. Secondly, just to have some understanding if the process allowed non-able people to be talked to or interviewed in regards to these type of living, and whether the design caters for non-able people as well. But just as importantly, that unfortunately equity makes changes to a lot of things that doesn't help a lot of people. So my other question is, does this align with equality more than equity?
Red. There we go. Thank you. I think that's an extremely valid point. I think, does the process align with equality? We interviewed industry stakeholders, so those main operators. I think there was a dozen or so of them, and the survey responses, well, they went out to all those currently residing in the region in terms of how that was conducted. But does the study delve down into that issue? No, I don't think it does, if I'm honest with you. I'd be quite frank, because I think that's, it is kind of out the scope of the study, but it shouldn't be in some respects, because that's just as fundamental. But the study was quite blunt in terms of the survey. We went out to over 1,000 residents. We got back what we got back, and we spoke to those currently building and operating those in the models in the sub-region. But there is a whole other equality side of this. You know, for those people, as you say, who don't neatly fit into the, oh, I can enter into a retirement village or I have those options. I don't think that study addresses that.
Here, Adrian.
Yeah, no, I'm quite fascinated by the study because the fear for me is exactly that, redundant retirement villages beyond some of our lifespans. When we look at 2048, and the youngest baby boomer was born in 1964, so in 2048 that baby boomer will be 84. I'll be 83 if I'm around, but yeah, it's quite fascinating, picking up on the cultural aspect and the intergenerational care. And I think one of the concepts of that would be where whānau do look after the elderly, which is awesome, and that's where the European lifestyle doesn't tend to the same extent. So did you, in the question, in the survey, did you ask what their employment was? Current employment was in their view with going into retirement villages?
I'd have to check. I think we asked things like, what's their expectations for retirement? What's your median household income? Where do you live? Do you look at moving from your current?
Yeah, because to probably just put it out there is that I do understand that some of the retirement villages, especially in my district, are targeting farmers retiring because they are, the ageing demographic. And so therefore the rural aspect is probably targeting the farmer because we're used to our rural vernacular. And it is a concern as we go out that they're not going to be as close to the services, like we said, around the availability of transport. The other question I have is obviously in that response where they want their own services, facilities, and how that impacts councils around their community assets and, clubs and things like that, because are they then creating their own little community within a community? And what does that mean from an urban design perspective and also a community perspective? Like, it's quite fascinating what it could look like.
Yeah, I think, again, it's a good point. It's something I quite like getting involved in terms of that urban design of these layouts. The people we asked, some of them were the developers looking at the villages, and they said, again, it was mixed, if I'm honest with you. There is that fear that you create gated communities if you're not careful. And are they truly integrated close to those settlements that they're showing? But some of them were saying they're looking at shared facilities. So they were saying, look, we're not going to provide a bowling green because we're just down the road from one in the local town settlement. So
yes,
I think that's creeping in, that thought that they don't need to provide for everything on site.
Well, it's the affordability of these places. The more facilities they put in, they're catering for a small group of people, whereas you've got clubs and facilities in a town. Councils need to optimise their community assets, and quite often these clubs are on council land. So that optimisation of our assets is really critical for the ratepayer. So I'm quite fascinated by that balance of that. So yeah, it's just an interesting point. So I'm glad you're over it. I think also for Matamata, because of our location being relatively central to Tauranga, Hamilton and Auckland and south, a lot of people are retiring to our town, to this town, and to Morrinsville especially, because of its central location to family and where their family are. They're not necessarily moving to the same town as their family lives, but they are within a stone's throw. I know there's some have moved from Waiheke Island to a retirement village in Matamata. There's that Auckland drift as well. So, and Tauranga back to over the hill as well because of cost. So there's lots of dynamics at play, but I am concerned around, obviously you've highlighted these fast track applications that are including retirement villages, and that risks an oversupply if they go ahead. So I would hope that the commissioners have that information. I think is the key thing for the decision makers, that they have that information to understand whether there is a genuine need or not. But yeah, very interesting study.
Thank you. Carolyn.
Thank you. I agree with Mayor Adrian, and as far as rural preference probably would be retiring, to my mind, are the outskirts of urban area. They like the peace, they like more of what appears to be the rural amenities. Anyway, that was my question. I want to delve in a little deeper into the survey. Now, there's a number of key assumptions that come out of that survey. And to my mind, I'm just 1,000 plus. That doesn't appear to be a large buy-in, given the size of our region. And also, how was it pushed? How was it sent out? Was it actually circulated through partner councils?
Yes, it was. It was in our usual mediums through partner councils as best as we can. I think the consultants spoke to a lot of community providers. They went out to retirement homes. I mean, the point is you don't want to speak to people already in the homes. That's why it was at 45 plus. And there was a lot of online media campaign. To be honest, I don't have all the detail. I can give you that. I wasn't expecting a full breakdown of the exact methodology, but I mean, I was actually quite impressed with 1,000 in 4 weeks, to be honest with you. But you're right; it does seem still quite a small survey. But you know, given the timeframes, the expectations from the consultants was a minimum of 1,000 respondents in a set period. You could open these things up for much longer. I agree, and you could, you know, try and up that number to get a more rounded view. But yeah, I guess that's one of the limitations of surveys being conducted over a short period of time. But yeah, it was largely an online campaign. We have a number of sector groups that I can provide after this if you need to show who we spoke to. But yeah, I'm not going to sit here and say it could have been a larger survey and a more in-depth survey, because if we had more time, we could have probably done that. Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, I just do also note there was a couple of generalisations in as far as slightly over half preferred more that urban or their rural amenity wasn't relevant, but slightly over half, what does that mean? Does that mean 51%? Does that mean 70%? You know, could potentially be a big variance there. And I am interested, to me, this detail is the foundation in which decision making is going to be made. So I want confidence personally that it's been robust and the process has actually been really such that it can give confidence we're tracking in the right way.
Absolutely. I mean, the full report will have those percentages for you in the appendices to show whether it's, like you say, 51% or 70%. Have the full breakdown.
Yes, Susan.
Yeah, look, I won't labour the point because most of the issues that or comments I was going to make have already been raised. Obviously, the eventual decline in population growth and over time and what that means for the sector. And this type of housing for seniors, I think, will be a really a big issue that we kind of have to grapple with in terms of planning and how we ensure that there is a flexibility of use of some of these areas. So look, I won't labour about that. But I guess the thing that really struck me the most and concerns me the most, a fascinating piece of work too, by the way, is the inequities that it flushes up in terms of the sort of systemic inequities around women, Māori, and that intergenerational piece as well. So I guess big shout out, obviously, for Waipa. We've got 93 or so of the 224 pensioner houses across the rohi, which begs the question, should we have visibility of each other's housing strategies if you have one? And does it have a commitment or an intention around to make provision for people who find themselves, for whatever reasons, later in life needing assistance in housing? And secondly, the question I guess has to be asked, do we have any comfort that this anywhere, anything, anytime approach is actually going to address the lack of affordability and pretty narrow offering in terms of topology for our people as they advance in years? I mean, that's the moot question, is that I'm not going to put you on the spot, but that's kind of what this is, the bigger question, isn't it? And I'm not entirely convinced.
Okay.
Yes,
Mayor Adrian.
Just following on from that, Susan's raised an interesting point. And of course, with intergenerational family care, at least now there is that enablement of a small unit being put on a section to cater for maybe having whānau on, family on there with one of their family members, so that there is room for them. But so that's a positive step, but it's still the affordability of it all the same, and how they care for them. I know that housing systems, though, like I know with just having recently experienced with my late mother-in-law, they are, there is an element to try and keep them in their own family home and not have them moving into care too quickly. Like there's those things around integration into a community, whereas if they're relatively independent, but they just need some support, that they are still part of your community. Because this is the fascinating thing about aging, is everybody ages differently and everyone has a different outlook on what that looks like. And it all depends on your mobility and your degree of independence and how close you are to support, whether it's a family member or a neighbour that cares for you. Because there are plenty of people where it's not family caring for elderly, it's actually a neighbour or so there's that. It's just a really, we can't look at it with one lens, it's quite a big piece of work. And while people might think the retirement village is where they need to go, what happens when they're not independent anymore? That retirement village actually doesn't provide for them. They're still deemed to be independent. And so it's the next phase, it's actually the high, and that's where a lot of these retirement villages are providing higher level care, but they're not built them yet. And so that's the fascinating part of it, is where is the greatest need? Is it the retirement village where you have independent living, or is it, where does the next stage fit in? That's the question I pose.
Yeah,
Susan.
Can I just add to that? I guess I'm taking a higher, sort of more philosophical view of it when I talk about the inequity, and I guess I'm talking more about the perpetuation of inequity that already exists prior to retirement. And I turn my mind to people I know who may own their own homes and what their likely pathway forward is in terms of retirement, and it sure as heck isn't the large offering that is on in Waipa. And although that the data might look good, it's about the actual reachability and the perpetuation of that inequity of a lifetime, I guess, will continue into senior years. And what role do we play as planners and leaders of our region to make provision for a more even playing field? It sounds horrible, but you know what I mean. I think we have to have some kind of moral conscience and understanding about the provision for people who find themselves needing more help into those latter years in terms of that security of tenure in a home.
Thank you. Nanaya.
Yeah, kia ora. Look, I have to say, equity is not a favourite word of mine. It's never done us justice or fairness, and there's not a good word out there to try and express my feeling, how I'm feeling at the moment. But I just wanted to thank you, for what you've done and describing your sense of equality. It means a lot because we're trying to make changes in Tamaki Makaurau, especially in terms of well-being. That the process of equity is not to be used in the sense of equality. Otherwise, you're never going to get the well-being that people really require. But I just wanted to add the fact that lived experience provides a lot of answers to the questions. And I'm just adding to what you were talking about, Mayor Adrian. When you have that lived experience, and you have that because you just told me your age, or told all of us your age, and you would have that totally. When people have that sort of understanding, man, the information and the answers you get to your questions is phenomenal. Because I can speak from experience because we've used that, and it's opened many doors to help people. Just want to pass that on to you. Kia ora.
Last question,
I'll keep
Angela.
my comments brief, but I think this discussion has just highlighted that retirement villages is just one very small piece of aged housing requirements. But I just wonder if we keep being cognizant that, you know, within density, you know, it's still possible to offer retirement living for people with, you know, ground floor apartments that are universally designed for disability and for aged people as well. You know, with the smaller units, level entry as well. So just wondering, yeah, if we can keep this conversation going, because it's fascinating and it's a real issue moving forward, and yeah, broaden the conversation as well. So yeah, thank you.
Well, certainly, and hopefully people around the table, because it'll come back to us when the report's finished. And then if deciding, okay, this is the report, where to from here in terms of the information and any recommendations that the report throws up. Thank you, Paul. Yes, we look forward to seeing you in the not too distant future with the final. Robert, anything in conclusion on these
I'll
matters?
stop typing Paul the email, making a helpful suggestion about recommendations. So I think what I hear from this is that Paul and the team need to think about, when we've come back with the recommendations, something around a broader look at the sub-regions thinking around our aging population and what their needs are and how we plan for those, and not be driven, as it feels like we are a bit at the moment, by the private sector's desire to service one segment of our community. So we'll have to frame that up as a potential ongoing work program for Future Proof to consider. Yeah.
Dorset tones here. I just said there is some work being done by the Waikato Wellbeing Initiative, looking a bit more on that affordability issue. So just flag that. Something else that's in the pipeline.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks very much, Paul. Okay, so we've got yes, I'll come back. I'll get through these recommendations. So I'm taking it, given that the committee are happy to endorse the vision statements as working versions for the spatial studies, and also approving the scenarios. So that's what you will be doing if you pass these recommendations. There don't appear to be any other questions or comments. If I can have a mover and seconder then for those recommendations from 1 to 3. Thanks, Carolyn. Second by James. Nothing further. I'll put those. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. Now, we were meant to be having lunch around 12. What I was going to suggest, we take a short break, we finish the rest of the agenda, and then have lunch. People are happy with that? So if we reconvene at 12 noon, that'll give people time to get coffee or anything else.